Welcome to this episode of Unraveling Adoption, an intentional space to delve into adoption's complexities together. I'm Beth Syverson. I'm an adoptive mom of an empathetic and passionate 20-year-old son, Joey, who is learning how to launch as an adult. I'm walking beside him while working on my own personal growth and healing. I'm also a certified coach helping guide seekers toward the wisdom of their own authentic selves. Joey and I are committed to helping anyone impacted by adoption, and we want to help the general public understand adoption's complexities better too. Every once in a while, I see in one of my adoptive parent groups that I'm in, I see a comment like, I have a 10-year-old who doesn't know they're adopted. When should I tell them? And I shout into the abyss, you should have told them 10 years ago. My goodness. I just feel so strongly that adoptees deserve to know their truth even from a very young age. And the deception is way worse than the pain of finding out that they were adopted. Today's guest is a late discovery adoptee who was not 10. He was 48 years old when he found out he was adopted. Whew, can you just imagine? We will find out more about his discovery and the reconstruction of his life that he's undertaken in the last few years since he found out in 2019. Brad Ewell is a Texas police officer, writer, and speaker who is trying to help others within and outside of the adoption community understand what it's like to be a late discovery adoptee and to encourage openness in adoption. Welcome to Unraveling Adoption, Brad.
Thanks, Beth. I appreciate you having me here.
Yeah. I think when people hear about LDAs, late discovery adoptees, the first thing they want to know is, did you have an inkling? Do you get asked that a million times?
I do.
And what do you have to say to us that are so curious about that?
It's different for everybody. Mm-hmm. For me, the answer is no, not in the way people would think.
Okay.
I have a close friend named Fred, who's also a late discovery adoptee. He found out sort of the same time frame age-wise that I did. He's deeper into it, but we found out about the same time age-wise. And where he grew up, when we've talked about it, always feeling like something was off and something was wrong. Mm-hmm. I grew up feeling like something was always off and wrong with me. And if I just tried a little bit harder, I could finally get with the program.
Oh, you internalized it, of course.
Yes, I just went, oh, well, if I try harder, if I do a little better, I can make this all work. Because I had no idea why it didn't fit. Right?
You're just like, I'll just keep pedaling faster, trying to make this life happen. And in what ways did you try? Were you an overachiever, that kind of thing? Is that how it presented itself?
I wouldn't say I was an overachiever. Like I was talking to my son yesterday or day before about school, and I was excited every year to go to the next grade. Okay. And it was always questionable at the end of the school year if I'd be going to a new grade.
Okay, so not in academics. Okay.
So my dad that raised me grew up playing football, baseball. So I assumed that sports were our thing.
Okay.
I tried all the sports and I hate all the sports. I suck at all the sports. I tried all of them. And I just kept telling myself, if you just keep trying, this is what we do. So you'll love this. And
oh my gosh.
I never did love it.
Well, and you're kind of a burly guy. You look like you'd be a football player. I bet that seemed like it would be a good fit, no?
No, I had no passion for it. I didn't enjoy it. It was just not my thing.
Oh my gosh. But you thought, oh man, I guess I'm just not good enough. Or did you practice harder and go to more coaches and stuff like that?
I just kept trying because I just kept thinking, my dad went to college on a football scholarship and had NFL offers. So I'm like, surely this is buried in me somewhere. I just have to keep digging at it and I'll find it.
Oh, wow.
And it was just never there.
Wow. And I have heard you on other podcasts say that it turned out that everyone knew you were adopted except for you.
Yes.
I think that's kind of amazing. Like, I can't keep a secret for 5 minutes. Like, I'm terrible at keeping secrets. How did that many people keep a secret?
I don't know. And that has always baffled me that nobody ever slipped.
It must be such a taboo, or it was at the time. Is that how you rationalize it?
I think some of it was a taboo. Some of it was my adoptive mom was an only child.
Okay. So not a big family.
So it was just her parents.
Okay.
My adoptive dad had a single brother.
Okay.
He lived in California. We lived in Texas.
Okay.
So we saw each other several years apart.
Okay.
So there wasn't a whole lot of interaction for anybody to mess up other than my grandparents on my adoptive mom's side. And I think they stuck to the script.
Okay. Wow. And how did you find out you were adopted? What is that story?
I took an Ancestry DNA test for fun because it was going to be fun. Oddly enough, my mom and dad never wanted to talk about any further than the ancestors that we knew. And my dad was a pilot. So he would fly overseas and was like, hey, if you're in England or in Europe somewhere, see if you can find our family crest. And he would always say, oh, nobody cares about that. And I'm always going, well, I care about it. I keep asking about it.
Yeah.
And finally, you learn to just drop subjects when they don't get heard.
Mm-hmm.
So when Ancestry came along, I think my wife and I at that point had been married at least 20 years, probably a little bit more. So we had kind of given each other all the gifts you can think of. And we saw that and thought, well, that would be cool.
Uh-huh.
She knew her genetic history.
Okay.
I thought I knew mine,
Yeah.
at least as deep as I could. So we took a test, and this is where, to me, I really see the strength of the secret keeping. So my adoptive parents knew we took the Ancestry test. They came over and watched us Chromecast the Ancestry DNA results on the TV screen.
No way.
And never said a word.
Did they act uncomfortable or push back at all?
Mm-hmm.
No.
Nothing.
Wow.
And all I really wanted to see was the maps. I mean, we didn't dig into DNA relatives. I never looked at DNA relatives.
Oh.
I was like, here's the map. Here's where we came from if you're ever curious. Here's Pam's map. And they just sat there like it was the most interesting thing and never, ever let on that anything could be wrong.
No kidding. And so do you think that's just denial? Like
it's a couple of things. One, it was denial. Two, I've come through a lot of therapy to understand. And I love both my parents that raised me a lot.
Sure.
But my mom had a lot of issues, and my dad did not want to ever rock the boat.
Oh, okay.
So there was not going to be an uncovering that she didn't want.
Okay. Got it.
And now that I've learned and we've had the few conversations we've had about it, I don't think they had ever intended to tell me.
Okay.
I mean, they didn't tell me. We took the Ancestry test, and it was probably 2 or 3 years later that what ended up being my aunt reached out to my wife through the Ancestry messenger and said, hey, I'm related to this person on your account. I can't figure out how. My wife asked me, and I said, I have no idea who this person is. And, I don't really know that many relatives, so I'm just not that interested. I mean, by that point, we had 3 kids. We both had jobs. I was like, I'm just not interested. She said, well, do you care if I keep talking to her? I don't care.
Okay.
Whatever you want to do. So over a few weeks, they kept talking back and forth. And Pam and I, my wife, were out on a lunch date, and her Facebook Messenger went off, and she picked it up and kind of made this face. And I was like, well, what's that? And she said, well, that lady I've been talking to just messaged me something, and I don't know what to think about it. And I said, oh, well, what's that? She said, well, she says that she thinks you're her sister's son that was given up for adoption, and nobody ever told you were adopted.
Wow.
And we both laughed that off because of all the things that didn't match anywhere in my paradigm of my life.
Wow.
So we blew it off because I was born in Dallas in 1970. I was like, I'm sure there were lots of baby boys born on my same birthday in Dallas in 1970.
Okay.
So I said, ask her what hospital. I'll come home, get my birth certificate out. And if nothing else, we'll at least get her back on the right track. I had my birth certificate for years now. I didn't know it was an altered birth certificate back then. But So it wasn't till that evening that as I was going through my birth certificate, and I immediately started noticing things were weird with it. So then I grabbed my wife's birth certificate, who was also born in Dallas in 1970, and put the two together, and they looked like they came from different planets.
Whoa. Okay.
So from there, my mind started spiraling to, I think everybody that has grown up with their biological parents at some point has gotten the guilt trip of, I went through this many hours of labor with you, and you're doing this. My parents, mom and dad, both had been at all 3 of our kids' births. And as I started rewinding in my head, I couldn't come up with a single time that anybody ever mentioned what it was like when I was born.
Yeah. What time it was, or like some circumstance of danger or nothing, no stories.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Okay. So you're putting all this together. Okay.
So from there, we'd asked this woman that ended up being my aunt to say what hospital I was born in. And she couldn't remember the name of the hospital, but had described it and texted it to my wife. And when I read the description, my heart sunk because I knew exactly where it was. It was 3 miles from my grandparents' house. And growing up, early as I can remember till my late teens, we would stop by there and visit this nice doctor that was a family friend, and we would chat it up with him. And then we go on to Grandma and Grandpa's house. And I was suddenly like, wait, I never went there for a doctor visit. That's kind of weird that she's talking about the same place. So then it would take the entire rest of your podcast to go through the story, but I eventually ended up on the phone with my dad having a conversation that I did not want to be a phone conversation.
Yeah.
And he admitted to me that they'd adopted me and not told me.
Wow.
While I was at work.
Yeah.
Not the right time to make that call.
And you worked at?
Yeah. So I was at work as a police officer.
Oh, Lord.
Sitting on the phone being told you're adopted.
Oh, my gosh. I don't know if you can describe what happened inside your head. Like, what did you see? What did you feel at that moment?
What it felt like, and I'm not even convinced I've ever been on one, but if you've ever seen those amusement park rides that spin really fast and you get pinned against the wall and the floor drops out, that's what it felt like.
That's a good image. Okay.
I was like, I'm stuck on the wall and there is nothing beneath me to catch me if I stop spinning.
Wow. God, Brad, I am so sorry that happened to you. That sounds horrible.
Yeah. And I think the more complicated part was my adoption was completely closed. So my adoptive parents had no answers.
Okay.
As far as who my mother was, who my father was, they had nothing. I ended up later on having to tell them the story of how I came to be because they had no clue.
Because that amended birth certificate that you were looking at that looked different from your wife's had their names on there.
Yep.
Which is so bizarre to me. Like, what are we doing? It's the weirdest thing. Gosh. But you did end up finding at least some of your birth family. How did that happen?
Well, so that's where I count myself in the lucky group of adoptees that go searching, because so many people go through years of searching, trying to get any nugget. Mm-hmm. My biological mom's sister found me.
Oh, that's who that was. Okay.
That's who that was.
That really was. Okay.
She was the sole person that knew my mom was pregnant when she had me.
Oh my gosh.
They were both living in Dallas together. Mm-hmm. So she knew everything except who my birth father was, but she had a strong suspicion and belief about who my birth father was.
And was she right?
She was right. And my birth father was her ex-husband.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So there was an added kind of complication to that whole story of she truly did, and I fully believe this with all my heart, she was the only one that knew for sure that my bio mom had a baby out there.
Okay.
And they were all, I mean, at this point, my youngest aunt was in her 60s and she's passed already. My oldest aunt is in her 70s. So she was afraid that if she passed and I ever did come looking, nobody would know what I was talking about.
Okay.
But then there was also the part that she told me, and she also wanted to prove to everybody that didn't believe her that her little sister had been sleeping with her ex-husband at that point.
Okay. Oh my goodness. And had your mom passed by this time? I'm sorry if I missed that.
No, my mom passed 19 years before I found out I was adopted. My
wow.
bio mom.
Okay.
So she was long gone before I ever found out.
Okay. And how did you find your birth dad?
So my aunt told me who she believed my birth father was and that he was in prison.
Okay.
She gave me his name. I think it's newspapers.com, and did a deep investigative dive through the newspapers of who this man was that supposedly I came from.
Okay.
I had been a police officer when I found this out for 24, I think, years. Mm-hmm. And I didn't know that people in prison at this point had email. So I was actually able to email him in prison. And that's how we started our conversation.
Wow.
And what I didn't know until much later was that she had already been emailing my bio dad, telling him that she knew the truth. She had found out.
Oh my goodness.
So when I emailed him, he wasn't standoffish, but he also wasn't ready to just admit to anything right off the bat.
Okay.
It wasn't until I actually sent him a picture of me at about his same age that he responded back with, well, hey, son, how are you doing? And that actually stopped our communication for almost 2 months because my pea brain was not ready for that yet.
Oh, wow. To be called son? Or
yeah, I was not. Mm-mm.
Oh, wow.
To be called son by somebody other than the people I thought were mom and dad.
Yeah.
Even though he was right and there was nothing wrong with it, he didn't do anything wrong.
Yeah.
I wasn't ready to work my brain around it.
I'm sure. And I'm sure it complicated matters having him being in prison and you're being a police officer. I mean, that's awkward. And are you interested in sharing why he was in prison or any circumstances around?
Sure. It's all unfortunately out there. He had committed a murder back in 1972.
Okay.
He had been in Angola State Penitentiary in Louisiana since 1972.
Wow.
I found out in 2019.
Okay.
So I think he was on year 47 when I found out.
Wow. How did that circumstance calculate into how difficult this whole thing has been? Did it make it harder?
Parts of it were easier, I feel like, and parts of it were harder. The easier part for me was I was able to fully control our conversations. If I didn't want to talk to him, I didn't have to answer the phone. His phone calls always came from the Louisiana State Penitentiary with, if you've ever seen the movie with, you are receiving a call from an inmate, that was the phone call I always got.
And it's only a certain amount of time, I think, right?
Only 10 minutes. We could email as much as we want, which was what I really stuck with for at least a year, probably a little bit longer, because I could completely control my intake of information, let it all settle, respond. Because, I mean, as I'm sure your listeners and you know, it's a horribly emotional thing to try to work through.
Yes.
So it was really nice to be able to read something and just sit with it and not have to immediately respond to what somebody was saying to you.
Wow. I'm very impressed with you that you didn't just say, I don't want anything to do with you because you're in prison for murder, and that you were open to talking to him, even if it was, you had to do it in spurts. But what about you made you open to doing that?
The initial part was at that point, I needed some level of closure. I was never going to meet my bio mom. That was done. That was my only biological parent that I could meet or talk to. And I wanted to do that. And it took me, I think we probably first emailed May, June of 2019. And I finally, through talking to a therapist for a little bit, and there's a longer story that gets me to therapy, but through a therapist, what she finally asked me was, your bio dad's in his 70s. He's had a heart attack before. If you get the call tomorrow that he's dead, is it going to bother you that you never met him? And I sat with it and I didn't like it, but I was like, yes, it's going to bother me. And when you asked about how it complicated things, I met him February, I believe, 17th of 2020.
Okay. Oh, wait.
And in March of 2020, the entire world shut down.
Oh, my gosh.
There was no more prison visitation. I couldn't go if I wanted to.
So when you met him in February, that was on the phone or something, or in person?
No, I made the trip to Louisiana, went to Angola and met him. And he and I have talked at length now about all of this. Like you said, you're impressed that I was willing to talk to him. My wife and I joked about how, well, the one thing we never have to worry about is, we started with, well, we'll never meet him. And then it was, well, I'm going to go meet him, but he's never going to, come to our house or anything. And I'm sure we'll get into later that he's out now.
Yeah. So has he been to your house?
He's been to my house. I've been to his house.
Gosh.
So it was a very bizarre place to be.
Your story has some very unique twists and turns, that's for sure. What adjective would you use to characterize your relationship with your dad now?
With my bio dad?
Your bio dad.
Amazing.
Really?
We talk either text or telephone, usually weekly, sometimes a week and a half. But I mean, he lives 45 minutes from me now. Wow. So he comes to my house. I had knee surgery last June, and he was the person that sat at the hospital with my wife.
Wow. And it sounds like your relationship with your bio dad has been part of your healing. It's been part of this reconstruction.
It's been probably the biggest part of it.
Wow. I wonder if at the beginning of this, if you ever dreamed that would be the case.
No.
Isn't that funny how the universe works sometimes? Like, haha, you thought you knew how this was going to go. Haha, we just laugh.
Yes. No, I've told him, I've told this story before. When I went to meet him, I had planned a one and done meeting. Okay, I'll meet him. Sure. I'll see him.
Check that off your list.
Because I was a police officer, I had what I thought was a very solid understanding of who I was going to go meet. I mean, he went to prison in 1972 and I'm meeting him in 2020.
Okay. Yeah.
So I had a pretty solid expectation of the person I was going to meet. And he ended up not being that person.
Wow.
And it screwed up my whole plan.
I bet.
Because I had we're going to meet, we're going to talk.
Yeah.
At some point, he's going to tell me what I believed would be his BS story. And I'd accept that. I'd get whatever info I could, and then I would leave and we'd be done with that.
Wow.
And I mean, one of the first things he told me was, I've been here a long time. I know the warden because you're a police officer. I can get you a longer visit. And I'm like, and this is all of the BS I expect to hear that's going to not be true.
Okay.
And I got there and all of it was absolutely true. I spent 8 hours the first time I went to see him, sitting with him in a visitation room.
So he really was on good terms with the officers there.
He was a trustee by then. He had been far from model inmate for quite a few years, but he had finally gotten his own stuff together after about I think he's told me it took him about 30 years before he finally kind of got on a better path.
Oh my gosh. Wow, that's a long time.
It is. What I've told him is I hate that he spent 50 years in prison. Mm-hmm. Had he not spent 50 years in prison, I would have never met him. He'd be dead.
For sure.
I guarantee you he'd be dead.
Yeah, for
based
sure.
on the life he lived when he was out.
And any of those first 30 years in, it sounds like if he would have gotten out during that.
He would have gone right back to his life, yes.
Sure. Oh my goodness. Well, tell me about, besides this relationship you have with your dad, what other tools or modalities or systems have you used to reconstruct a life that you thought you knew who you were, but was not really true? How has that been for you?
The biggest part was therapy, honestly.
Okay.
And it's something a lot of people hate doing.
Yeah.
But I had to sit down with somebody. I mean, I've got a very supportive wife, but I needed somebody professional, not attached to me, to a lot of times just be able to call me out on my own BS. Mm-hmm. Because as a spouse, you don't always want to be the one to go, yeah, do you really think that?
Yeah.
But I mean, that's what I pay a therapist to do, is look at me and be like, I don't think that's right.
Yeah, someone neutral. So
it started there. I saw that later into this journey, but it so accurately described where I was at, which was as hard as it was. And I mean, I'll say this to anybody that's had a DNA surprise discovery. This is a very hard thing to hear, but a lot of times you're being offered an opportunity that not a lot of people get. And it's not a fun opportunity. I don't know anybody that would sign up for it.
Yeah.
But at 49, 50 years old, I was able to kind of reinvent myself into who I probably would have been at some level had I not been adopted. I mean, adoption is always going to affect my life, but I was able to step back and look around and go, oh, well, no wonder I hate sports. That's not my thing. No wonder I like art. Yeah. My biological father is a painter and a woodworker, and I laugh. I didn't find out till probably a year and a half, probably 2 years ago. He was a draftsman before he went to prison. Mm-hmm. He learned to paint watching Bob Ross VHS tapes in prison.
Oh, Pretty Little Clouds.
And now he paints beautiful paintings.
Oh, wow. That's amazing.
But all of a sudden, as I met, like the first person I met was my half sister. She was amazing. And it was kind of like running into someone that you've been close with for years and lost touch with. Okay. When I met her, it was like we'd known each other our whole lives. Wow. I mean, we didn't skip a beat in conversation. There was no awkwardness. It was like we'd just always known each other.
Wow. That biology again. You just felt close.
Yeah.
Wow. That's amazing. It's almost like you got a do-over.
In a way, yes.
Midlife. You got to start all over. Like, who am I? And I guess a lot of people have a midlife crisis and kind of like, who am I? I guess I better go buy a convertible or whatever. And yours kind of came at you an unexpected way. But if people take that opportunity to really do some self-examination, it could really lead to a lot of growth. Yeah.
For me, it has. For me, it's been a tremendous growth experience. I mean, if you would have told me, we'll say May of 2019, that this is going to be a tremendous growth experience, I would have told you, I'm just trying to survive today.
Yes. Right after you found out.
But now, 5 years later, I can tell you that you may have met her when we were at the conference together. Did you meet Lena Scahill?
Oh, yeah. She was on my panel. Yes.
Okay. So Lena took a picture of me in Garden of the Gods in the exact same spot that my wife took a picture of me 4 months after I found out that I was adopted.
Oh, wow.
And when I look at those two pictures, I feel like those two people don't even know each other, really.
Wow.
It's like seeing two different people.
Wow. I can get that because similarly, for about 5 years, my son, since February of 2019, has had his mental health crisis and has been on the struggle bus. And that was certainly nothing I would have wanted to sign up for. But it has prompted me to do some deep, deep work. And I'm very grateful for the opportunity to do that work. But it's no fun.
No.
It's not like, let's do this. I don't know why the universe sometimes says, okay, your turn. Here you go. Here's a big one for you to figure out.
But it is nice. Like, you talk about a lot of people go through the midlife crisis. Mm-hmm. It was nice to have an excuse for mine.
Yeah.
People weren't like, oh, he's just having his midlife crisis. Well, yeah, I was having a midlife crisis with a very good reason behind it.
Yeah. Everyone can go, whoa, that's intense.
Yeah.
Well, and you even have to sign off on those DNA tests. This might create some chaos in your life, right?
Didn't even blink when I signed up because I was for sure I knew who my parents were. And I could not have been more wrong. Oh my
gosh. Be forewarned, people taking those DNA tests. Oh my goodness.
I tell people,
I bet.
If you decide to spit in a tube, talk to me.
Yeah.
I'm not saying it'll be the worst thing that happened to you because it's worked out well for me. It hasn't, and it's still not always fun.
Yeah.
I mean, even in the best reunion, and I consider my reunion story a really good story, it's still horribly hard.
Yeah. It's relationships. Relationships are hard, no matter what.
It's relationships, and my sister passed in March, my half-sister that I found through this. But I've told my sister, my cousin, really everybody, because they accepted me with open arms. But it's like walking in on an inside joke all the time because I'm lacking 50 years of history. So even when everybody's open, they start talking about things and I have no context for it. And that's not their fault. They're not doing anything wrong.
Yeah.
So even when a reunion is great, it is hard.
Yeah. Yeah. You still feel like an outsider, I bet.
Yes.
Even though you're in now, but you still feel like an outsider because you don't have that history. Oh my gosh. Okay. So when I see another adoptive parent, which I know I will in one of these forums online, that says, my kid is 10 or 8 or 4 or whatever, and doesn't know they're adopted, and I just don't know how to tell them. It's so hard. What do you think I should tell them?
Well, I think you said it in your intro. You should have already told them.
Yeah. Long time ago.
But every day you wait, you're making things worse.
Yeah.
And especially for my parents, at least, all of the stuff that's available now wasn't available. I mean, when they were in this, when it was the 70s and 80s.
Yeah, they really could have kept it a secret.
Who knew you could spit in a tube in the mid 2015s or so and find out who your biological relatives were?
Wasn't in the realm of possibility.
But now we're in a day and age where every day you wait, you're risking them finding out another way. And I'll say for my story, my parents lectured me more about the importance of truth and the importance of, if you've done something, we better find out from you instead of somebody else.
Like you'll get in less trouble.
So then to turn around,
sucks.
and then to turn around and find out from what ended up being a relative, but in my view, from a random stranger on the internet that I'm adopted, instead of my parents telling me, and then having to go ask them, that's not what they want to have their kid do.
No. And are your adoptive parents still around?
They're not. So I met my bio dad in February of 2020. My adoptive dad died March of 2020.
Oh my gosh. That must have been so complicated for you. Oh my goodness.
It was.
Whew.
And that took another big break in my bio dad and I's getting to know each other just because I just couldn't.
Oh, that's intense. Wow.
And then my adoptive mom passed last month.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Oh my goodness. Brad, you've had a lot going on the last couple of years. Good night.
It's not been a fun 5 years.
Yeah.
I've gotten to do a lot of cool stuff, but it's not been all fun.
Yeah. But you've gotten really engaged in the adoption community, and I'm sure that's been helpful mostly, right?
That really goes back to that whole idea of leaning into this in some way. So for me, for about the first, I'd say at least year of this discovery, I could fully identify as somebody that had had a DNA surprise.
Okay.
I could not wrap my head around that adoption may have had any effect on my life. It took me about a year to start getting to know a handful of adoptees and being like, oh, this could really have affected me.
Okay.
And what I found in a lot of those DNA surprise spaces, and really it's true for the DNA surprises, the donor conceived circles, the adoption circles, it is a highly emotionally charged place all the time. And it's very hard to be in that space when I was already just in constant turmoil to then, log into Facebook and get in this group where everybody's in constant turmoil. And all I wanted was just a minute or two of peace.
Yeah.
So that's actually how I stumbled into Right to Know. Was I found their group and their site, and there's other groups like this, but they were just the first ones I found that really seemed to be trying to move everybody in their group in some kind of healing direction.
Okay, good.
It wasn't about staying in the pain and the muck and the mire of the discovery all the time. It was about this absolutely happened to you and it absolutely sucks.
Yeah.
But are you sure you want to live in just the anger and rage of it forever?
Okay. Yeah, Right to Know is a great group. They are the ones that co-sponsored the Untangling Our Roots Summits.
Yes.
The one in Louisville and the one in Denver. And they're going to be in Atlanta in 2026.
Yes.
And you're on the board there, I think, right?
Yes, I'm one of the board members.
Good. Yeah, Right to Know is amazing. So it's primarily for donor-conceived people and NPEs.
Cara Rubenstein really developed the organization with the other people that started it around the idea of the donor-conceived, the NPE community, and the adoptee community have so many things in common that if we can work together as a group with all of our commonalities, we can get so much more done than just as a group of adoptees or just as a group of donor-conceived people.
Yeah, I think that's so smart.
Because there's just better strength in those numbers.
Yeah. Well, and adoptees have been working on it longer than the DCPs because of the technology.
Right.
DCPs have not happened for very long. So, well, that's amazing. You're doing such great work. And I love your blogs and all the things that you're doing. So I really appreciate you coming on here.
Sure.
Is there anything else that you wanted to mention that I haven't given you a chance to? Or would you like to let people know how to get a hold of you?
Sure, I can do both. I'd say the one other thing that I would say, and I've really learned this from a couple people in these communities, is if you're struggling with this, the best thing you can do is get in community with people that are dealing with this.
Okay.
And it's taken me time to explain to my wife that it's not that she's not supportive.
Yeah.
It's just that unless you have gone this path, you really don't understand this path any more than I understand what it's like to give birth to a child.
Right.
I don't know what that was like for her. I can empathize with her, but I can't really be like, oh yeah, I know how that is, because I don't.
Yeah. Right.
So I've found the community is an immense help just getting past some of this stuff.
Yeah. Oh, that's so great. I agree.
And then as far as finding me, I spend most of my time social media wise on Instagram. I've got 3 different accounts. My adoptee one is a Late Discovery with an underscore between A and then between Late and Discovery.
Okay.
And then part of my journey is, like I said, I hated sports. I was always drawn to art. I ignored art my whole life because that's not what we did. And I have not stopped creating either through my own art or photography in about the past 3 years.
Oh, art is so healing.
And that's on a separate Instagram called Cut and Shoot Art.
Okay. Oh, I'm going to look that up. That's amazing. Yeah, I literally believe art saves lives. I'm a musician and I think the power of art is incredibly intense, and I'm glad you found art. I know sports can also be helpful for people, but I'm glad you found your path with the art. I think that's great.
Yeah. For people that it's for, it's great. For people that it's not for, it's probably like being a football player trying to be an artist. Yeah. It's just not fun.
Exactly. The opposite way. For sure. For sure. Well, thank you, Brad. I think you're amazing. I want to support you as much as I can. I'm sure our listeners will love hearing your story, and hopefully they reach out to you and share this episode. Very good. Thank you so much for being on.
Yeah, thank you so much.
And listeners, after you check out Brad's information and all of his artwork on the internet, go ahead and find Unraveling Adoption there as well at unravelingadoption.com. And I wanted to make sure you knew about an upcoming event we're doing in person in Seal Beach, California, which is right in between Orange County and LA County. It's called Adoption Healing Quest on February 8th, 2025. I've never heard of anything else like this. I made it up, and I've got 9 other practitioners that are also adopted or birth parents that will be working with me that day to provide interactive presentations throughout the day. And in the evening, we're going to have a hybrid screening of Brian Stanton's film at Ghost Kingdom. So if you're not in the LA, Orange County area, you can join us that night for the hybrid screening. It'll be an all-day long event full of community and healing and new ways of looking at adoption. So please consider joining us that day or share the event with someone you know who might live nearby. The show notes below will have the link to our Eventbrite for the Adoption Healing Quest on February 8th. Thank you all for listening. Brad and I want you all to stay safe.